wind, today would be a great day, except nobody else is here. Steady 33-mile-an-hour wind here in Albuquerque. So if you want to know how to play into the wind, let's go inside and talk about it. Okay, so we came in from outside. We'll let the wind blow like crazy out there. We'll talk about how to play in the wind right here. First things first, let's talk about what the speed wind really impacts the play of pickleball. And generally, a wind of up to about 9 to 10 miles an hour is still going to be playable. It'll have some impact on the game, but nothing that would completely disrupt the game. So anything up to 9 or 10 miles an hour, you're probably pretty good. 10 to 12 miles an hour is when you start to see that the ball has significant movement based on the wind. Of course, it has that for everybody, but that's when it really begins to impact play. 12 to 15 miles an hour is kind of the outer limit because you'll see the ball kind of wildly going off course where you hit it. And of course, anything over 15 miles an hour it's like the Wild West. Anything can happen. I don't mind playing in the wind, but if you get wind that's over 15 miles an hour, it's going to be tough to have a quality pickleball game. But here's a little tip that can really help you determine how much the wind is going to impact your game. If any part of your clothing is moving, if your sleeve is flapping in the breeze, if your shorts or your skirt, if you're wearing a skirt, are moving around, any loose clothing that's flapping, that means there's enough wind to impact the game. The wind is definitely going to impact the flight of the ball, the distance, the direction, those kind of things. So important that you're aware of that and make the necessary changes in order to maximize your chance of having a good game. All right, and thanks to viewer Joe McSweeney for submitting the idea for this video. First things first, we've got 3 types of wind that we'll be playing in. One is a tailwind, that is the wind is blowing from behind us towards our opponent. Second one would be a headwind, where the wind is blowing towards us from our opponent's side. And then the other type would be a crosswind, where the wind is blowing across the court and it could be in either direction. Now, of course, winds can swirl and they can change, but we're going to talk about 3 rules for each type of wind for you to pay attention to in order to have a better game. First, let's talk about playing with a tailwind. That is the wind blowing from behind you and what that's going to do to the ball. Okay, so when the wind is coming from behind you, the ball is going to travel faster. It's going to travel farther, and it's going to do more as far as distance with the same power that you normally hit with. So when you're playing with a tailwind, when you feel the wind blowing behind you, or when you see the windsock on the court blowing, the first thing you want to do is you want to punch your shots more than swing at them. Okay, so if you're traditionally swinging at your ground strokes or something like that, you want to be more punchy. You don't want to go soft on hitting the ball, because when you go soft off and you try it, you wind up hitting the ball up in the air. And of course, with that tailwind, a ball up in the air flies out of bounds. So punching means you're shortening up your stroke, not punching the table, shortening up your stroke, snapping the wrist a little on all of those strokes. So you still are having a good, crisp attack off the face of the paddle, and then you let the wind do the work in moving the ball faster. Make sense? So you don't have to quite hit it as hard. You don't need as much of a swing or a follow through, but what you want to do is punch the ball toward your opponents and let the wind carry the ball faster than it normally would with that stroke. Tip number 1, shorten up your stroke and punch. Tip number 2, when playing with a tailwind, is the lob is out of commission for these games. It's very difficult to land a lob in pickleball anyway, because the court is so short. You don't have a lot of depth to land it. With the wind behind you, if you're going to send the ball up into the stratosphere with that wind blowing 10, 12, 15, 20 miles an hour, it's going to blow out almost every time. So the lob is not really going to be an effective shot for you. So you're going to want to lay off of that until you perhaps get a headwind, or you're playing where there's neutral wind. And then the third thing that you want to do when you're playing against the wind is you want to keep the ball lower. If you normally return your serves 2 or 3 feet over the tape, over the top of the net, you're going to want to aim lower because the ball, even on a straight line, is going to carry much further depending on the speed of the wind. And so with your serve return, you're going to want to aim just maybe a foot over the tape and let that ball come down before the wind carries it out of bounds. And that's going to give you a better chance to keep the ball on the court. It's really frustrating to hit a great shot and just see it endlessly keep floating until it lands out. And here's a bonus tip. When you are serving with the wind at your back, step back off the line 3 feet. Okay. Assuming you have that much room, step back 3 feet off the baseline before you serve, and then take your regular serve. As long as your regular serve isn't one of those moon balls, but if you're hitting any sort of serve that's going to spin down or a flat serve that's going to angle down, take that 3 feet, and that gives you 3 feet extra to land that serve in. Make sure you look at your feet, make sure you measure it up by eye, but go back. And if you find that you're still hitting it out, even with that, step back as far as you can. Touch your paddle to the back wall or the fence or whatever's behind you, whatever that barrier is. Make sure you have enough room for your backswing and go back that far. Take as much room as the court will allow. All right, so what about if we're playing into a headwind? A headwind is a wind that's blowing at us. I particularly like playing into a headwind because it gives you a lot of options. And so we're going to talk about some of those. First thing with a headwind is you want to drive through the ball, and you want to drive the ball low and hard at your opponents, except in a few key situations. And when I say drive, I mean you're hitting a flat drive or you're hitting a top spin drive that's going to go down, but you're going to hit the ball harder than you traditionally do because the force of that wind is going to knock the ball down. And so if you don't hit it harder, you may find some of those shots in the net, or you may just leave them very short for your opponent to come up and crush for a winner. And what happens when the ball gets high in the air column in the wind will push the ball up and have it hang there. That gives your opponents, especially if they're in the transition zone or at the kitchen, that gives them a chance to come in and finish the point off. So we want to keep the ball low, flat. Top spin is great, but drive through the ball harder than you normally would when you're facing a headwind. The great thing about a headwind is the lob is back in play. In fact, the lob can be absolutely deadly as a strategy when you have a headwind because you can throw the ball up there and hit it much harder and higher, and it still has a very good chance of landing before it crosses the baseline. Have your opponents coming forward. You see that the wind is coming at you. You hit that nice strong lob up into the air. One of the things it's probably going to do with a little bit of that wind resistance is wiggle around a little bit. That makes it harder to return, but you have the opportunity to land that deep on the court because the wind is going to help you keep it in. And traditionally, the shape of a lob shot into the wind is something where it kind of comes over and then just hangs and falls once enough speed is gone from the ball, the wind just pulls it straight down. So by all means, if you like hitting lobs when you're in the headwind, hit them. If you don't like hitting lobs, you may still want to try it because it's a very effective shot. The other thing that you want to do into a headwind is you want to use what I call the dead drop. And you've probably done this inadvertently, at least, if not on purpose. And that is when you're hitting into a strong headwind, you can take your approach shot, you can take your drop, and you can even take some of your serves and hit them just hard enough to get over the net and over the kitchen line, but hit them essentially very softly. And what happens is when they run out of momentum, they don't have enough, they drop straight down. And because the ball doesn't have a lot of energy at that point, it doesn't bounce very high. So if you're hitting dinks, cross-court dinks, you can do the dead drop just by hitting it a little into the wind and letting the wind kill it. If you're serving and you can get right up near the baseline, serve just over the net so it crosses the kitchen line and then hits that dead drop and doesn't come back up. You can do that with your drop shots from the baseline or the transition zone. Really, really effective. You need to hit it high enough so that it gets over the net or over the kitchen line before it falls. But of course, as we go back to point number one, you don't want to hit it so high that the wind hangs it up and gives your opponent an easy put away. But that dead drop shot is really, really effective and will keep pulling your opponents closer and closer and closer. And when they do that, of course, you can go to the old trusty lob. All right, let's talk about a crosswind. A crosswind is a wind that's blowing across the court from either side, and you'll have to adjust depending on which way it's blowing. But a crosswind, very, very common to play in, and it's going to shape the ball either to the left or to the right. So let's talk about 3 tips to be more effective playing in a crosswind. The first one is, especially on the serve, I want you to aim your feet where you want the ball to go. If you traditionally hit to the middle of the service box and that's where you aim, and the crosswind is going to come across and push your ball to the middle, you're going to have to aim further out toward the sideline. And I don't want you to just try to hit it out there by, moving your arm. I want you to actually shift your feet so that you are facing that sideline and then serve in your traditional form. And what will happen is that crosswind will blow the ball back to the middle or toward the center line. The positioning that you set up with is really, really important. It's not just standing the way you always do and just hitting more to the right or more to the left, especially on the serve when you have time in order to set up properly. Second thing in a crosswind is that if you've ever played against a player who puts a lot of spin on the ball sideways, the ball hits and kicks one side or the other. Well, playing in a crosswind is much like that. And the ball that you hit down the middle as your opponent's in the transition zone starts to go like this. So you as a player should be tracking where the ball is. If you hit the ball down the middle with your paddle, you want to track where it lands because that's where it's going to come from. So we should never be surprised when we hit a shot and all of a sudden it's being returned from over here because that's what the wind demanded our opponent do. And rather than you still looking at the middle or still kind of waiting for what would be a regular return, you're going to have to come all the way over or all the way over to the other side and be prepared to return that ball. Okay. It's a subtle and small technique, but really, really important because the ball does move so much side to side. And especially when you're in close to the kitchen line, some of these shots can come very fast with the wind still affecting them. And the third key tip for playing in a crosswind is that it's not always a crosswind. Think about this. If you and your opponents are at the kitchen line and you're going to play the angles, if I'm on the left side of the court and I'm going to backhand dink cross court, I'm no longer hitting into a crosswind because the wind is coming this direction. I'm hitting into a headwind. If I'm on the right side of the court and I'm going to hit a dink or a drop shot or a speed up across the court to this side and the wind is behind me, I'm hitting into a tailwind. And that puts us right back where we started this video. If you are dinking into the wind, into a headwind, because I'm going to go cross court on my opponent, then that means I've got to do exactly what I would do with a headwind shot and not worry about the crosswind. And that is, I would have to keep the ball lower. I'd have to put a little bit more drive on it. I could use the dead drop if I can cut it, put it softly into the wind and let it fall down. If I'm on the right side of the court and I'm playing with that same wind, now I'm playing with a tailwind, which means the ball's going to fly further. I've got to keep it lower. I've got to try to get some top spin to shape that shot so it goes down before the wind can blow it out. So anytime you're playing with a crosswind and the space between you and your opponents gets tight and we start dinking side to side, now we're playing headwind and tailwind pickleball instead of crosswind pickleball. I love playing in the wind. I think it creates a great challenge. There's people that cannot adapt to it very well. And typically, if you just accept the fact that the wind is affecting everybody in the exact same way, if you stay in tune and pay attention to where the ball is, where it's going to land and where it's going to come from, you're going to have no problem with this. So use these tips to play better in the wind, enjoy it more, win more points, and win more pickleball games. Hey, if these tips have helped you, please like and hit the subscribe button, which is right down there. And if you would like to send me a message, you can just do that on the video underneath. Tell me what your idea is for the next pickleball video on Dink This. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.